Good morning, everyone, and Merry Christmas. This is Nevin Gussack, your host of the Populist Patriot. And today we have our special guest, or one of our special guests, Jeff Nyquist. Jeff Nyquist is a prolific author, commentator, has a blog, JR Nyquist blog, that is available on the World Wide Web for you to read. He is a scholar and analyst when it comes to national security and other political and economic and historical subjects. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Nyquist to our show, one of the final shows for the year 2021. How you doing, and Merry Christmas, Jeff?
Thank you. Merry Christmas to everybody out there. And I know you're Jewish, so you had Hanukkah already. So happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah belatedly. Um, so we're near the end of the year, and I think one of the things that strikes me about the year is that this is the first year in which people can see what I saw 30 years ago when I wrote Origins of the Fourth World War. When I'd finished writing it, is that the political system basically is bankrupt. Just as the economic system is approaching bankruptcy, the political system in the United States, because the main actors, the people who really advance their career politically and get all the attention, they're mainly selfish. They're mainly self-oriented. They do whatever it takes to make themselves presentable and plausible, and to hit the themes that people want to hear. They tell the people what they want to hear, but they don't mean it. Nothing they say really means anything, because they're just pursuing opportunities for themselves. Grifters, self-enrichment, people who want attention. As far as being serious about figuring out what's happening and actually doing something effective, I don't see very many. I would put Ben Carson in a category by himself, as one of the few people that I see as being serious. That is, he studies things, he tries to understand things, he's tried to do things, but he just doesn't get he doesn't get very far, because the enemies of our society, who do understand strategy and are working for a cause, however demented, what they're opposed to, what is opposing them on the right, are people like Mr. Trump, people like Lynn Wood, or Sidney Powell, or General Flynn, or heaven forfend, Mike Lindell. And so we have this large group of people on the right, and we see, unfortunately, more and more that they don't really mean what they say. However much they pronounce the right words, there's something wrong with them. That is, that nothing ever gets done, nothing happens, and they might strike a note that's the truth now and then, but they don't show that they really know what's going on. They don't, like you, Nevin, you're a serious student. You've studied what China and Russia have been up to. You've studied some of these very difficult issues that nobody's really wants to get into because it's too much detail and too much work. Russia and China are very dangerous enemies of the United States, and they're quite obviously now working together, and we're under very serious threat. And the way these people talk about politics, you'd think that everything else was more important.
Well, I think the last individual on the right that had an understanding of the threats of Russia and China and really was a skeptic of our so-called opening with China back in the 1970s, and certainly during the 1980s, Reagan's expansion of relations with China, and later his appeasement of Gorbachev's Soviet Union and even Yeltsin's Russia, was Senator Jesse Helms. I think he was on the foreign policy front and the understanding of communism, he was the last of the good ones. Most of the other ones, even Ben Carson, I mean, I've studied Ben Carson's position on China. And basically, while he recognizes the threat of China, like most of the other Republicans, he prescribed a lot of the same Reaganite formulas that actually made us less competitive when it came to industrial production, you know, because when you look at Reagan's record, I mean, I don't mean to digress on this, but I think it's a very important fact. Reagan did things like encouraging the outsourcing of jobs for diplomatic reasons, for corporate reasons, through his Commerce Department. He also got rid of the construction differential subsidy, which gave a boost for our shipbuilding industry. In the name of free market economics, Reagan decided to get rid of that months into his presidency in 1981. And the belief that other countries, even free countries like West Germany and Japan, would drop their subsidies. Well, of course, that didn't happen. They remain very competitive. They continue to expand our shipbuilding industry, and while our shipbuilding industry declined. So when I look at these facts, and Jesse Helms had none of that kind of view. Jesse Helms was not a free trade person. He was not a corporate globalist and whatnot, but yet he was also a strong anti-communist. So really, if I had to pick a hero as Jesse Helms, and really his views tend to be very much of a dinosaur within the Republican Party, even the Trump party, because Trump, you know, he generated some very good discussions, brought up some very important issues, and on this show, I would say I agreed with his administration's actions about 25% of the time. My concern with Trump is that he brought in more of the same Republican conservative incorporated type solutions. I mean, for the purposes of our discussion, one of the things that the Trump administration was entertaining was splitting Russia from China. I don't know if I know you and I have discussed that before on a previous episode.
It's an idiotic idea.
Of course it's an idiotic.
It's like you can, you know, how are you going to do that? You know, either, you know, they've picked their alliances already. You think you're going to unpick for them? You think you can decide for Russia and China that they're going to be enemies now because it's convenient for you? They played this game with you for, you know, half a century, the Sino-Soviet split thing, for more than half a century. Look at where we are now. We financed China, we built it up. Now they're turning against us, and the Russians are laughing at us. You think they're going to split with each other? They just accomplished the greatest political, you know, divide and conquer, you know, strategy and fakeroo in the whole history of strategy. And they're gonna just hand that victory over to us? You got to be kidding. These people in our country who run our country, they're children. They think like children. Like it's a child's game. This is not a child's game. This is an adult game. And none of them have their heads in the game. They're all trying to gain their personal advantage by crafting narratives for the public that's completely ignorant, that doesn't know anything. So the level at which discussion happens, political discussions happens on this country, is like an elementary school level. And this won't work. We're dying here. Our economy is going to fall apart. We're headed for war with Russia and China, and our nuclear weapons are obsolete and they're going away. And the public has no idea. They know that there's economic problems because they're seeing the inflation show up, but they have no idea that we're on the point where we could be defeated, and that defeat could be final, and it could result in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people because our enemy, one of our enemies, China, wants to get rid of the lower 48 states and build a second China here and basically genocide the rest of it. You know, you could look at Chiao Chen's secret speech. You look at what Colonel Lunev told me, the defector who spoke fluent Chinese, fluent Mandarin, I should say, rather. So, you know, I don't, you know, Peru just became a Marxist, just got themselves a Marxist president. One country after the other is falling to communism now. And look at who's in the White House. A guy whose family has taken millions from the Chinese, Joseph Biden.
Well, let's
And
take a look at Biden for a second. I mean, he lifted the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which is a communist terrorist group, a brutal one at that, off the list of international terrorist groups. You have the situation with the Nord Stream pipeline, which Biden gave the go ahead on that, which has confounded many within his own Democratic Party, and a number of whom have opposed him on that, not only the Republicans, but also a number of Democrats, as I'm sure you've read in the news. I mean, really, there's no serious action towards China by Biden, as far as we know, unless there's something going on behind the scenes, but it's doubtful. I mean, when you look at Biden, I mean, I wouldn't, from the point of view of the show, not necessarily yours, but the point of view of the show, yes, he is a sort of Wall Street Democrat when it comes to key domestic policy issues. But when you look at his foreign policy, I mean, Biden has tilted his sails in the prevailing political winds, and on many occasions he has undertaken measures, even personal diplomacy, that has benefited our enemies, really and truly. I mean, you look at what he did in the Soviet Union in 1979 with Senator Dick Lugar, basically saying, this is according to a declassified, smuggled record of a meeting between Soviet officials and Biden, and Lugar saying, well, we're just going to kind of pretend to care about the Soviet dissidents and pretend to try and do something, but we really don't care. I'm paraphrasing it, of course. I mean, this is what you're dealing with here. You're not dealing with somebody who is in politics for the right reasons. Let's put it that way.
well, let me
And
say,
it's very uncomplimentary towards Biden.
this. I mean, Mr. Biden is a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
His what you just described was that he was willing to throw Soviet dissidents under the bus. That means he's extremely immoral. He has no he has no love for freedom at all. He is willing to assist totalitarians to help them and hurt people who are struggling for their freedom. That means he's a bad guy among bad guys.
Well,
He's
you're
an
familiar
enemy.
with that document where,
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with it. It's been, look, and Biden's not alone in this. A lot of our politicians, you look at Clinton's, you look at Obama. There's something terribly wrong with Mr. Obama. He gives lip service to a lot of the good causes, but what happened to the dissidents in Russia? With Mr. Obama running like a puppy dog to Putin when he made his first visit to Russia, sitting there being lectured to by Putin. Putin was the prime minister then, not the president, and being dressed down by Mr. What president of the United States now? What kind of poodle was Obama to Putin? What is the KGB? You know, when you consider that uh, Obama's mentor, Frank Marshall Davis, was a card-carrying Communist Party member, and that his FBI file suggests that he was working for the KGB because they caught him taking pictures of our military base at Pearl Harbor, what, in the late 50s or early 60s? I
yeah,
forget when they caught him doing that. They thought he must be working for
middle of the 20th century. It
middle
was
of the
a
20th century. He's taking pictures of Pearl Harbor. This is the guy that trained Obama, by the way. And Obama, by the way, Joe Biden was Obama's handpicked vice president. So who are these people? I submit to you, look, I don't know, I don't have proof, I can't convict them, but my feeling is Obama's a communist, or at least he's forced to work for them. He was brought up to work for them, and that Biden is the same thing. He's the creature of the communist international system, which is on the point of victory right now. And that's where we are. And if people want to know, they look at the right and they want to know why it's failing. The right won't speak forthrightly about that. In fact, look, you practically have to martyr yourself to talk about these things publicly, you know, because they'll kill you, or a little hook will come out like this, get across your neck and pull you right off the screen. Um, because, you know, I've known radio personalities, people who I've been on their shows whose careers were destroyed for having me on, people with big audiences, or who were told on their own because they were talking about communism and the threat of communism, they were basically, their careers ended.
Seriously,
So
why is that? Why? Who told them that this is
network
astounding?
executives and network
And what
executives,
was the rationale given?
you're no rationale. You're not gonna. We don't want you talking about communism.
What do you suspect it was?
Oh, I suspect that they have some cross deals with Chinese communist entities, or maybe that the Russians have infiltrated the organization, or the Chinese, that there are Communist Party members in the organizations controlling them. Maybe there's blackmail on people. Maybe people have received bribes. The communists have infiltrated our system. Our institutions are not American anymore. They're corrupted, they are infiltrated, they are compromised, and you could see it across the board. Look, your carbon footprint, you're supposed to now not use coal, natural gas, gasoline, oil. You're not supposed to use those things because it's a carbon footprint, right? The Chinese and Russians can use as much as they want, but we are not supposed to produce it. So they kill all these jobs in America. They try to destroy our oil. We were oil, before Biden became president, we were self-sufficient in energy. Now we're not, because we have to reduce your carbon footprint because the world's going to heat up and become like Venus. Do you believe that? That's communist propaganda. Most people, almost everybody in our country believes some crazy notion they got from communist active measures. That's active measures produced by Russia and or China and the communist international networks, the Communist Party USA, through their control of the media, through their control of the Democratic Party, through their influence on the Republican Party. All of our institutions have become satellites, in effect, of very, you could say, clandestine communist networks. I
Well,
mean,
and it's interesting. On the right, I have found too as well. For every Obama, Clinton, and you have Republicans, even ones that claim they're conservative. Let's say Ted Cruz, for example. Ted Cruz, when he was a lawyer, represented a Chinese communist tire company against an American competitor who was basically being buried by unfair trade practices. I mean, even under the Trump administration, while Cruz has definitely sounded the alarm on China, he has made very revealing statements that really shows where he's at, that he doesn't fully understand the gravity of the problem. And he says, basically it's not like Cruz says, that we should still do business with China, even though they have their unfair trade practices, this, that, or everything else. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do business with China. Well, wrong.
let's be clear about what he should be saying. He should be saying we need to close every Chinese embassy and consulate in the country. We need to close every Russian consulate, and just like what we have with Cuba. We can't have any relationship with these people because they will exploit that relationship. They will find Americans who are willing to sell out to them, and they will progressively paralyze and cripple our own system, based on exploiting the selfishness of individuals here.
Yeah,
Because
well,
individuals will have the choice legally to sell out to the Chinese, whether it's a Wall Street banker or a CEO of a company, or people just, all right, we'll let the technology go. We'll make millions. It doesn't matter that it's worth billions, and we'll let it go. The fact is, there's no gatekeeper at the gate here, and now the time is running out. Time is absolutely running out. They want to inject us with something, with a vaccine, and they haven't properly tested it. And now they want to mandate it for everybody. It was not long ago they said we won't mandate it, and they said that it's up to you whether you take this thing. Now they don't know, and it's like, so what is directing our system? Who's directing our system? Is the system directed towards freedom and the interests of the people, or is the system directed towards the selfish benefit of a few people?
well, and where are these vaccines made? I mean, my understanding is many of our pharmaceuticals, our PPEs, our vaccines, antibiotics are made in the People's Republic of China.
Some of the materials are made there, and that's the thing. A lot of our, I think someone can correct me. I think 80% of our vitamins The materials that make our vitamins, they might put the stuff together here, are made in China. A lot of our medicines are made in China. I was concerned because my father's on high blood pressure medication. When this started, if what happens if China cuts off that medication? People who have really severe high blood pressure, if they don't have that medication, they can die of a stroke. Waiting to get that medicine. Um, so to be dependent, and let alone for our military to be dependent, or to be dependent on anything, a big power like the United States, to have this kind of dependence. And look, talk about stewardship of the nation and its resources. Mr. Biden, I'll just state it flatly, I believe, people could say I could be wrong, I believe he's a traitor. I believe he has committed many crimes. If he's properly investigated, I think that his crimes they could be capital. Treason is a capital crime. Anything that betrays of course, today now, you could say to people that almost nothing is a capital crime now. That you could say to people, look, everything is that the treason has no definition, because they don't believe we should have a border, right? And okay, everybody should just be able to come here, and there shouldn't be a border. See, okay, so you don't have a country. So how can you have treason against something that doesn't have a border, right? It's not really even a country. So now try to imagine, if the viewer could try to imagine this, try to imagine if that border were erased, if the idea of the country, the United States, disappeared, what would it be here? What would you be living in? What would it actually end up as? No military, no defense, no anybody could come here and do anything to us that they wanted. And now we're near the end of the second year of a biological war, World War III. World War III began last year. I'm just telling you that. We were attacked with a weapon of mass destruction, the SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, they call it whatever, virus, right? It was made in a lab. We know it was made in a lab. We also know, I've been told this, our military intelligence people know that it was released on purpose. Well, they're pretty sure. They're pretty sure because they have sources in Wuhan that it was released on purpose in Wuhan, that it wasn't actually developed in that. Well, they developed an aerosol spray that was tested on primates there, but the actual virus was developed elsewhere and shipped in by the generals. And they were ordered to give it to the population there, and they were told that it wouldn't spread, which is a lie. What are their bosses going to do? Contaminate the city? We want to kill our own people? No, it's just a test, right? And then when the city fathers, when they knew that there was a viral pandemic, they wanted to stop the New Year's potluck last year, and they wanted to stop the dance. The officials in Beijing said, don't you dare stop that. They closed off Wuhan from the rest of China, but they let the air traffic, they let the people go out to Europe, to Australia, to Japan, the United States, everywhere else, because they wanted to infect the rest of the world with this thing. Not that this thing is that fatal. It's a low grade biological weapon, but it economically, with the lockdowns, with the responses here, it has damaged our economy. It has destabilized us politically, and the reaction has been incompetent, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book shows, the real Fauci. So you see, if you go to the actual, 80% of the people that have died in the pandemic here, according to some doctors, shouldn't have died. So we've got a real problem, because it's not, a biological attack enabled by our own officials who are making it 4 times worse than it otherwise would be, or 5 times worse, whatever. They're making it, they're effectively making that war effective. Who owns them? Fauci has cross deals with the Chinese. Big Pharma is in bed with the Chinese. What, they get their ingredients from? Right, the Chinese can make their ingredients cheaper. And of course, they're losing out to the Chinese at the same time, because why? Because people who are compromised can't defend their own position.
Now, on the backdrop of that, and I also believe personally that the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic, excuse me, was a Chinese biological attack. I've talked about that on other episodes of this show and some of my solo monologues, piecing together various forms of evidence. When you look at what's going on now in the world situation, I've been seeing a post on my Facebook from a retired, I believe, lieutenant colonel. This individual lives out in the western part of the United States. And this individual posted that they are testing the emergency sirens out in that part, Rocky Mountain, western part of the United States. Are we closer to World War III than ever? Now, of course, on this show, I believe that the Cold War never ended. What say you, Jeff? What's going on?
No, the Cold War never ended. Look, after, there are people in our military establishment who had the sense that we might have been under an attack last year. You look at it's very funny, late March, early April of last year, the Strategic Command dispersed its bombers. Now, the official reason they gave for dispersing the bombers was that there were storms, right? The bombers were in danger from storms. So they had to disperse them for storms, right? Right at the moment when America was starting to lock down from what was in effect a biological attack, they knew that the attack was on purpose. The problem is the generals don't make the political decisions. Even if a general has intelligence in the Pentagon and the Defense Intelligence Agency knows the Chinese attacked us with a biological weapon, they can't make the decision that this is what it was and that we have to respond in kind. That's up to the political leadership. Political leadership, both President Trump and President Biden would never accept. They could have positive proof that China attacked us with a biological weapon. They would not accept it or act on it politically.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that's the case?
Because our political system's more like a Disneyland ride. You tell the people what they want to hear and you put a happy face on everything. Because if you don't, you won't get reelected. Because if you've allowed this to happen on your watch, if the Russians and Chinese are our enemies, then how on earth are you to explain your malfeasance, right? How do you explain your malfeasance? That you have allowed this to happen and that you're not responding in kind. And if you respond in kind, we're vulnerable to other worse things. Our economy is vulnerable to them. We're vulnerable. We don't have civil defense. China and Russia both have sophisticated anti-ballistic missile systems. We're trying to upgrade ours. They have sophisticated anti-ballistic missile systems and shelter systems for most of their population. We don't. We have a very weak ABM infrastructure, and we have and our population's not trained. They don't know the difference between long-term fallout and short-term fallout or how to protect themselves. We think that if a nuclear war happens, it's the end of the world and everyone dies, which is not true, by the way. You read any Russian or Chinese book on this, and that's what they say. Why would, Hiroshima, the streetcars were working the next day. What do you mean it's the end of the world? It isn't what you think. There are things about this that because the public wants to feel good. Oh, that can never happen because it's the end of the world and nobody would do that. No, they would do that, and it's because it's not the end of the world. You've been lied to. And so they're not going to say this. Now that dispersing the bombers was one thing. They put permanently deep underground bunkers. These deep bunkers we have that are like up to 1,000 feet underground. We put the permanent nuclear war military staff in protected positions. So like when we started sheltering, when you remember we were going to flatten the curve in the pandemic, and that was in March of last year. So a few days after that, the Pentagon moves its staff. Look, you had things I had from intelligence from certain communist countries in the Far East that they were permanently keeping political staff in underground bunkers around the clock all the time. because World War III could break out at any moment. I mean, this is and they started pulling some military equipment out of mothballs. There's been, I think that the Pentagon is a confused reaction in that at the very top they don't want to admit anything because the political leadership is like, oh no, that's too extreme, we can't. But people at some level, they know this is very serious, and so they have taken certain steps. So the sirens you're talking about, military military preparations in Russia and China are at a very high level. For example, I heard a military debriefer earlier this year talk about the air surges, right? The Chinese will send these missions of aircraft towards Taiwan, and it's like an attack that turns back, you know. They'll fly near the island, they'll do, you know, and you're thinking, is this an attack? Is this it? And then they'll turn around and go back. The Russians have been doing these kind of things too. And the thing is, they've been putting more planes in the air more frequently than we thought that they could. So which means they either have more aircraft than we think they do, or they have an ability to turn them around, maintenance them, get them back in the air faster than we ever imagined, which shows us that they could actually get air superiority over us, or air supremacy even, maybe for a couple weeks. And that's only one dimension in which they've surprised us, in which they've shown a greater ability. We had uh, earlier last year, we had an Air Force general, quite a brilliant one, uh, say, you know, we need to put more pressure on the Russians because putting pressure on the Russians puts pressure on the Chinese.
Hmm.
I was so glad to hear him say that. That's the commander of our air forces in NATO in Europe. Um, I'm forgetting his name right at the moment, but you can go back and watch. His lectures are quite brilliant. He's quite impressive. And but there we do have some military leaders who are aware that China and Russia are working together, and if we put real pressure screws on the Russians are going to tell the Chinese, "Hey, hold on a minute, we're under real pressure here. We can't go." So there are games we can play by applying pressure, and I
Well,
think we have played those games a
let
little
me
bit.
let me stop you right there because I think all excellent points, Jeff. If you were advising a future American president right now, what economic, political, and military pressures and intelligent pressures would you put against Russia, and communist China?
Well, I would tell them as much fracking, as much oil you can get out of this country, and I would put massive pressure on Canada to produce more oil, and and I would just start cranking the oil, cranking the energy production out, in order to suppress Russia's energy production, or the money that they get for it. That would be economic pressure on Russia. I would um, I would definitely focus on the Caribbean allies in the Western Hemisphere. I would clamp down on Cuba, Venezuela, Peru, Nicaragua, and I would say, no, we don't tolerate the construction of Russian or Chinese bases or the moving of Russian and Chinese troops into the Western Hemisphere. First thing I would demand is all Russian Chinese troops be withdrawn from the Western Hemisphere.
All sounds good.
Yeah,
All
I
sounds
mean,
good.
the thing is that this is the kind of thing that we need to do. Look, we may not be able to challenge them around the waters around Taiwan, but they cannot uh, dominate the Caribbean. So we shouldn't let them in at all, you know, and we should use our alliances overseas. We should do everything to strengthen Japan, Australia, especially India. We must do everything to make India a top ally of the United States. At the same time, doing all this, we should make it very clear to the Russians and the Chinese that we don't want any war. I don't think we should be deploying forces in the Baltic states in large numbers. First of all, it's dangerous for the forces deployed there because those aren't defensible positions, right? And the Russians can make a big deal that because we put a tank regiment there, uh, that we're threatening St. Petersburg, right? Which is ludicrous, of course. If you look at a map, people don't realize the Germans couldn't take what was then Leningrad, St. Petersburg, in sieging it almost 3 years because of the terrain around it, very swampy ground. They couldn't take it. I mean, it's ridiculous, the idea that NATO is really threatening it, but the Russians are making a big deal about it. And as far as Ukraine goes, I'm very dubious about. I think Ukrainian freedom is important and must be supported. But the idea that that we should make Ukraine into a place where we're going to station large numbers of troops, that is going to threaten Russia. And we should be willing to say, look, we don't want to destroy Russia or take Russia apart. We want Russia to be free. We want Europe to be stable. But we are committed under the Budapest memorandum to the independence of Ukraine, and that Ukraine better be independent. It better be. And so I think there are nuanced positions to be had that will not, that the Russians can't say, look, you're threatening us. Because I really don't think NATO is in a position to threaten anybody right now. They're too weak. But defensively, and of course we have to renew our nuclear forces, and we have to put that on high speed. We have to start building nuclear weapons within the next 36 months. And what I understand is we're not going to be ready to produce a new nuclear weapon for 8 more years.
Now, what is your take on, you mentioned civil defense, and I've taken the position in my writings that civil defense is very critical to preserve not only our infrastructure, but our greatest, most precious national resource in this country, and that's our people. What would you specifically recommend in including a viable anti-missile system? What would you recommend for our civil defense? What specific steps would you take as a policy?
Well, we have to teach civil defense principles in high school. And any teacher that refuses to teach it or subverts the teaching of it should be fired. And I know that a large number of them would subvert this, because I was a teacher. I know what they would do. They would laugh. They would mock at the idea of, look, you have people mocking the duck and cover drills. Duck and cover saves your life. Why? Because one of the biggest effects of a nuclear blast is flying glass. Sitting in a classroom, there's a window. You get a blast wave come through. That glass could injure those children, right? Because most people, the only people who are killed in a nuclear blast are the people within so many miles of ground zero, depending on the megatonnage, right? I mean, in Hiroshima, you had people survive that were directly below the blast. Of course, that was a relatively small bomb. But most of the people within the blast radius, let me put it this way. Slightly more than half the people within the blast radius of a nuclear detonation are going to survive. And wouldn't you want that number to be increased if ducking and taking cover from flying debris would save your life? So they make fun of that. They make fun of that, saying, oh, that's useless. It's the end of the world. We have to get rid of this nonsense. People don't want to think about war. What are you, children? Again, Disneyland, you're children. You don't want to talk about reality. You think this is all make-believe, right? Nuclear weapons, they don't exist. I remember I was going into a meeting with a Russian defector, Colonel Stanislav Lunev, and all these Americans were there. And I go, the one thing you have to, I was talking, Stan Lunev, and I said, the one thing you have to understand, Stan, is that they don't believe in nuclear war. They don't believe it's ever going to be waged. The nuclear weapons are just meant to sit on top of those missiles and look pretty. And he looked at me and he said, really? I said, yeah, they don't believe in nuclear war. And of course, in the middle of the discussion that followed with a number of famous people that if I said their names now, you would know them. They said, oh, surely this one CIA guy said to Lunev, surely you don't believe that the Russians would ever, unleash such a war. The Russians or the Chinese would unleash such a war. And he said, are you a normal person? The guy was kind of confused because he thought he was secret agent man, right? And he says, well, you sound like a normal person. He said, let me tell you something about the people I worked for in the Russian general staff. They were not normal people. Basically, they were psychopaths. And they gave us, for my 31 years in the Soviet and the Russian military establishment, we trained for one mission and one mission only, global thermonuclear war against America. And there was no bluff about it. That was what they trained for. And he said, so, and everybody in that room, they were kind of looking down at the table or their feet or whatever. I looked around, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to see their reaction. It's like they couldn't, and I knew this from graduate school. When I was in graduate school and I studied the Russian strategists, I would go and talk to these guys they were older graduate students and they were already working at part-time at Rand Corporation or doing stints at the State Department or the CIA or wherever they got their little jobs at. And I would mention these, yeah, have you read Soviet military strategy? Have you read Sidorenko's The Offensive? Have you, what do you, and this is in the 1980s, Reagan's president. This is when the Cold War's really heated up, right? And they're going, nobody reads that stuff anymore. Nobody believes that. They're not going to have a nuclear war. And I'm looking at them going, we have, I don't know what we had then, 30, 40,000 nuclear weapons on each side pointed at each other. And we almost did with Able Archer in 83, almost had one, came very, very close. And it's like, don't you understand that this is a war game, and you can have a full-blown nuclear war and maybe only kill 20, 30 million people in the United States, maybe only 11, 10 million people in the Soviet Union, because most of the weapons were pointed at other weapons, right? And of course, if it depends on, Peter Price speculated that they could do air bursting to even wipe out our silos to prevent bomber fratricide, which would mean very little fallout, very little death from fallout. So, depending on how the war is waged, it doesn't have to kill all these people. Their missiles aren't focused on cities. They're focused on other weapons. Why? Because it's about getting supremacy in nuclear weapons. It's about wiping out the other guy's nuclear weapons, and you have nuclear weapons left and he doesn't, and then you point him at the cities and you say, stick them up. Now you got to surrender, right? Like in 1945 against Japan. What did Japan have to do in August 1945? Hiroshima, Nagasaki, oh, we give up. That's it. We want to keep the emperor, but otherwise we're going to give up. And they did. And so there is no defense if you don't have these weapons. And right now we've allowed our weapons are nearing their end of their shelf life, and we don't have replacements for them yet. This is President Bush, George W. Bush tried to get the weapons. First, the Democratic Senate stopped him, then the Democrat-controlled Congress stopped him, and then Obama was president, and he wouldn't have it until Congress kind of forced him to start a program on a very low-key basis. Well, in 30 years we'll have a weapon. No, the shelf life is going to be before that. Last year, the head of the Strategic Command told Congress that within 3 years, our nuclear arsenal will be past its shelf life, and our nuclear weapons will not be reliable. We will not have a reliable deterrent. This is 2021. That's 2 years from now. We're going to be approaching the obsolescence of our nuclear deterrent. Boy. Did the American people understand what that would mean? The Russians are not children. They're not on a Disneyland ride. The Chinese leaders aren't either. So you think that this is like we all this entertainment we watch. This is just entertainment. No. You're real. Pinch yourself. These bombs are real. This balance of power thing is real. And these people over there in Beijing and Moscow are playing for keeps. So what are you doing? Why are you a child? Why do you need, what does Biden say? Oh, I'm going to go to Putin. He's the Easter bunny and he'll give me chocolate eggs, right? They'll be my ally because now the Chinese are being mean. No, he won't. You idiot, you moron.
Now, there was another story you related in another interview, not on this program, where you had an encounter with a political advisor to a prominent billionaire. And this person told you, well, Russia and China, we'll just have missile defense and everything is okay, but you really can't talk about the threat of Russia and China because the billionaires are investing in Russia and China, and
He said the industrial and financial elite in this country will not support the belief that Russia and China are enemies.
Why is that?
And my book at the time, this book had just come out. It's The Origins of the Fourth World War. This book had just come out. And they took an interest in me. This billionaire came and heard me speak in Washington, along with Colonel Stanislav Lunev. We were both saying, look, there's indications that Russia and China are really getting together. especially that year, because Russia and China openly started making military liaison moves in '99 after the Kosovo War. And then that they were doing, the Russians were taking steps. We know the Chinese military buildup was beginning to accelerate, and the Russians themselves were doing things like putting extra fuel tanks on fighter bombers so they could, on a one-way trip, they could deliver a nuclear warhead to North America, that kind of stuff. So very weird things the Russians were doing to make their military viable against the United States. Um, and Nobody wanted to hear it. And of course, it was kind of this billionaire to come and listen to us. I got invited to his headquarters and to speak to his chief political advisor. And his chief political advisor was rather extraordinary man, because he said, I know everything in your book is true. He told me this. I know it's true because he was fishing buddies with one of the defectors, a defector that I only think I mentioned a couple of times in here. He's not one of the big ones, and he said he told me that the whole collapse of the Soviet Union is a strategic maneuver. We know it is, but you can't get the financial and industrial elite in this country to accept it. So he said, what our strategy is to get them to go for Star Wars, get them to go for strategic missile defense. As long as we have strategic missile defense, we'll be fine. So what he didn't understand was the infiltration of the country at the political level. What he didn't understand was that our institutions would be undermined from within, and that our concepts, the first, when people talk about disarmament, they think they're talking about weapons. There's such a thing as intellectual disarmament. We've been intellectually disarmed, and we're disoriented, because most Americans, if you said, is China an enemy of the United States? Most Americans, I believe, would say no. There'd be a significant number would say yes, but most would say no, I think. And if you said, is Russia an enemy, I think an overwhelming majority of Americans would say no, Russia's not an enemy. They might say Putin's bad or whatever if they're Democrats. Maybe the Democrats have gotten the propaganda that Russia is bad. I don't know. I think a majority in either case would say no. And of course, you've got a divide in the country. You've got the left thinks that Putin is the enemy, and the right thinks that it's permissible among a fraction on the right to say that China is. But then you have this big group of Republican businessmen who want to do business in China, and you've got people like the Bidens and the Obamas who helped Russia get control of, what was it, 25-30% of our uranium?
Yes,
The
that's correct.
Uranium One deal, right?
Mhm.
So you see what is this, the level of the seriousness here? See, well, I remember Victor Suvorov, it's the pen name for Vladimir Rezin, a GRU defector. He said, Americans are not serious people. He said, we realized this back in the 1970s. Americans are not serious people, right? Your children.
What
Waiting.
was your reaction, though, your immediate reaction after you talked to this chief advisor to the billionaire? Because I'll tell you, if it was me, I would have been disgusted. And it's those
Well,
nuggets of,
that's 1999, and I have to say, look, I had already written this book, and this book basically predicted I'd hear this, right? Because I'd analyzed the wealthy, right? I analyzed these people in here. You've read the book.
yes.
It's the selfishness of the radical individual who thinks, well, who doesn't realize that he is a member of a nation that has to survive. I mean, I challenge everybody listening to this. You think you're an individual or you're a citizen of the world? No, you're not. You're lying to yourself. There's your Easter bunny and your chocolate eggs right there. There is no Easter bunny, and he's not going to deliver you any chocolate eggs. You're not a citizen of the world, you idiot. You're the citizen of whatever country you belong to. You speak a language with a certain kind of accent. Everybody can tell what you are. I had a friend, she was going to live overseas. She was embarrassed of being an American. Oh, I'm going to live, she was looking all over South America, places she was going to live. And I go, you're not those people. You think there's a world crisis and you think they go against us? You think they're going to tolerate you? You're going to be the first person in the stew pot. She just laughed. No, they'll accept me because I'm not really an American. Are you kidding me? You're an American because you talk like one, you act like one, and you think like one, even to the point of hating your own country because your country's culture now is against itself, because it's very American to be anti-American right now, which is really sick. But that's what active measures do. 50 years of active measures of the KGB has done. You think we got this way? You think Americans are naturally self-hating? Don't want to have gasoline in their car and don't want to have a good job and don't want to have a better world for their kids? Yeah, they're all willing because they're so confused. They don't know who their enemy is. They think that life is going to get better with windmills, right? Or I'll get on a exercise bike and I'll make electricity. Yeah, that'll really work, right? Maybe for you it'll work because you're doing a lot of exercising. But I mean, the fact of the matter is these people, their reactions are like children, and they don't read anymore. And they don't think seriously anymore. And they think because they've watched so much of the boob tube, it's a story that has a happily ever after usually, if the producer wants to make money, you're going to feel good movie. So that's what they do. And they don't understand if you go back to Herodotus, he was born around 500 BC. He was the first historian that was telling stories like what we would say, wow, that's history. That's interesting. That's what happened. You go back 2,500 years, 2,600 years. You've got all these stories. Do you think they have happy endings? I think it was a happy ending for the Babylonian Empire or for Israel or Judea, the Jews, after the Maccabees and the Romans and the Parthians came along? You think it was happy for Egypt when the Persians came along? You think it was happy for the Greeks when the Romans came along, or the Carthaginians, or for the Romans when the barbarians came along? Everybody goes down for the count.
Well, getting to the point of active measures, I mean, they continue to this day. A recent Venezuelan military defector, a high-level one, I think one of its chiefs of intelligence, Carvajal, he talked about how through Mexican intermediaries, the Venezuelans funded what were termed spontaneous demonstrations in favor of the Maduro dictatorship, these presumably American leftists.
Oh,
You
how
look
wonderfully spontaneous.
well, yeah, meanwhile, the country is
A funded spontaneous demonstration. I love it.
yeah.
Isn't
Well,
it
they
great?
probably meant it
Let's
as,
fund a spontaneous demonstration.
yeah,
Let's fund one.
well, he meant it in jest and in humor. I'm sure Latin
Oh,
Americans are
now
very
the
famous
communists are
for
always
jest.
doing things like that. Yeah, no, maybe we should explain what an active measure is to the audience because maybe we're losing them. An active measure is a kind of information operation in which you basically feed a story, a narrative, a false narrative, to a enemy country, so that they start to believe it. Typical false narrative would be like the FBI, or rather that the CIA and a big oil killed JFK at Dallas in 1963. That's an active measure. We know from the Matrokin defector archive that that was that was a KGB operation.
Yes, it was.
They created false documents and things to show that the JFK assassination was a conspiracy of capitalist elites or the CIA, but the actual evidence points to the Cuban communist DGI and the KGB being involved with Oswald and before Kennedy was assassinated.
Well, as I mentioned in a recent interview with Cliff Kincaid on America's Survival Roku TV program, one of the things that I unearthed was an article, I believe, in the LA Times where Oliver Stone first got his idea for JFK at a film festival, an international film festival in one of the luxury hotels in Havana, Cuba in 1988. And it just so happened that Ellen Ray of the Covert Action Information Bulletin, which was a Cuban Soviet started publication back in the late 1970s, well, she just handed him a copy, I think, of Mark Lane's book. And Mark Lane, of course, received money from the KGB in the 1960s to propound propaganda that basically said, oh, the assassination of JFK was a conspiracy by the CIA and anti-communist Cuban freedom fighters, this military-industrial complex, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. So
By the way, right now we're making many listeners uncomfortable or unhappy saying this. because they've read all these conspiracy books filled with active measure false information, and they actually believe in these JFK conspiracy theories, and that the real truth about what happened in the assassination, the fact that the head of assassinations for Department 13 of the KGB went from London to Havana, and the head of that department for the DGI, the Cuban KGB, went from Havana to Mexico City when Oswald went to Mexico City. These movements of intelligence officials, both KGB and GGI, occurred when Oswald went to Mexico City. And then Oswald went and he picked up a payphone, and of course we had, with the help of the Mexican government, we'd bugged the Soviet embassy at the time. Oswald, the CIA recorded him calling and asking for um, a Kostikov, I forget whether it was Yuri or Sergei Kostikov, at the Soviet embassy, who was identified as a KGB officer, part of Department 13. That's what affairs assassinations for the KGB. Right. So all of these things, which is, by the way, what Angleton, as the head of the counterintelligence staff at CIA, told Warren, Earl Warren of the Warren Commission, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren, and LBJ. So that LBJ, I mean, they had the very strong notion that, oh my gosh, the President of the United States was killed by the communists. And of course, a lot of people don't realize why they would have done it, why they might have been justified in doing it from their own point of view, is that Kennedy had ordered the assassination of Castro. They had actually recruited a Brazilian, I believe it was a Brazilian man, his name eludes me, to shoot Castro with a sniper rifle, right? And Castro found out about it. He went to the Brazilian embassy and he said, that Kennedy's trying to kill me. You know, it was like in September of 1963, and he warned that this is a two-way street, right?
That's correct. Yeah, he said infamously that, you know, Kennedy tried to kill me, but now I'll try and kill Kennedy is what.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it goes both ways, and it's like, so you see, this is why, you know, people, but you know, I was against last year. They assassinated General Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, right? The Iranian general. They assassinated him, by the way, when he was on his way to a parley. I understand, wasn't it with the president of Iraq, our ally?
Correct. That is correct.
So, look, I'm an American. I'm for my side, but I'm ashamed. You don't assassinate an enemy general while he's on the way to a parley with your ally. You don't do it. That is wrong. There are rules. There is honor. That's dishonorable. I hate that. And the people that do it, and this is why this is dangerous. This is stupid. Not only dangerous, but stupid. You don't do that because they can do it to you, and you're more vulnerable to this than they are. So you're going to play this game of assassination? Assassinating enemy leaders? It doesn't matter. I mean, he was a potential leader of Iran. He was high up in their infrastructure. Head of the Quds Force, it's very high up. That's like commander of the Marine Corps, I guess. Something like that, right? So I mean, I'm not insulting the Marines, but he's a commander, and it's a real rank. And it was a parley he went to, and he was killed. He was murdered on order. Our president bragged about it. So I remember that. You know, it's like, you idiot. Now they have the right to assassinate. If they assassinate you, what can you say? You order assassination, they order one back on you. Are you nuts? I don't know why the Iranians, I guess there was something about Trump that the Russians must have told the Iranians, don't kill him. That is worrisome too. Our leaders aren't even worth assassinating anymore. Think about that. Don't kill him. He's right. He's good right where he is. But normally, a normal country, you kill one of their generals, which one of our generals would they retaliate on? I mean, you'd normally retaliate on the person who gave the order, right? Or you'd retaliate on one of our generals. They didn't retaliate. Why? Well, just one look at Milley, and you'd realize no enemy would ever assassinate General Milley. I mean, if a Russian GRU operation assassinated General Milley, The people in the Kremlin would call that whoever ordered that assassination, and they would have them executed because it would be against their own interest, against their own strategy to kill someone like Milley. Oh my gosh. This is the kind of position we're in. This is the kind of leaders we have. It's a joke. And coming to the end of this year, what I would say is, look, we've seen our leaders all across the board just blow themselves up by their own statements, by their own ideas of what's happening, by their own leadership. We didn't have any auditing of the election to settle this matter. It's gone now. The chance to show what really happened, to heal the country or to bring it back to some kind of level of truth. What is the truth? What happened? Settle it once and for all. It's gone. The pandemic has been mishandled, and everybody knows it. You got people coming down. You were vaccinated and you got sick, didn't you?
I
You got
did.
COVID after being vaccinated.
I did.
And so did people in the White House. There's people that are being refused to be let on airplanes. They've been triple vaccinated. They've had their booster and they test positive for, the latest strain, and they're not allowed on the plane. Well, what did I get vaccinated for? And those of us who've had it now, we have natural immunity. And so what is going on with this incompetence on every side? And the thing is, it's got to end. And the American people, to some extent, have to become more active and demand that their leaders not be so interested in lining their own pockets and pursuing false narratives, whether it's false narratives on the right or on the left. But we have to look to the security of the country, not to threaten China or Russia. We don't want to threaten anybody. We just want to be secure here, and we want to be able to protect our own interests, right? And those of our allies. And so I think as we approach the end of this year, it's becoming obvious, very obvious, that our leaders on the right have failed us, that the people we believed in should not have ever been believed, that we've got nothing but a pack of grifters and opportunists who don't do their homework, who don't really care about the country, who don't take anything serious, who are just playing for plausibility in front of large numbers of people to keep themselves politically viable. That's what we have. And it isn't, we aren't going to survive with that. We need better than that. We need people who really care, who will do their homework, and who will seriously try to think these problems through. And they have got to impeach that man, Biden, and they've got to get rid of that vice president. They have to do something. I mean, there's got to be someone in the Democratic Party that at least could do a halfway decent job next to those people. It's unbelievable.
I think
It's a
where we're going to get
disgrace.
the best people for the cradle of a new leadership, a new set of fathers of the nation, frankly, Jeff, is from average people, because the people with money, with some exceptions, of course, are the individuals that have led this country on the wrong path and has led us to make very tragic decision making based on naivete, greed, selfishness, and treason. And that's the bottom line, as how I see it. And I think when a crisis, a massive crisis of untold proportions comes to this country, as you've outlined in your book, Origins of the Fourth World War, I think you're going to have those unique individuals from average America um, come to the fore and hopefully lead this country onto hopefully a better path to the future. And I couldn't agree more with what you said in your conclusion. I've been very disillusioned with the political right as well. I have my own unique stories to tell, which I've discussed in previous episodes of this show. And that's why, I am politically homeless. And Herschel, my co-host, and I have created this project, which has about 454 subscribers of the Populist Patriot. And we hope to continue to educate our audience with the issues that are currently troubling our world, our country right now. Any other last thoughts before we conclude the show, Jeff?
Well, I wish everybody a happy new year. Because we're headed into a new year, 2022, believe it or not, and that it is going to be a year of crisis. I am told that the Chinese economy is in extreme crisis, so that according to one Wall Street banker, the Chinese economy is probably going to collapse by the end of the second quarter of next year, and that there's going to be very severe, very bumpy road economically for everybody, and that we are facing potential military crisis both in Eastern Europe and the Far East, and that could easily become a larger global war. The United States has already been attacked, I believe, with a weapon of mass destruction, a viral weapon. We could see further attacks leading all the way up to nuclear attacks. So, I think this is a time for people to really pay attention, especially those that don't have a full-time job anymore. Better read up, better find the right books to read. And mainstream stuff, no. Yeah, it is. This is they're living in a. That's the Easter Bunny with the chocolate eggs that are never gonna come. So that's about it.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. And again, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate in our audience. And we'll be probably having another show, either a solo show or Herschel and I before the new year. But again, thank you for joining us. A lot of great facts, a lot of great analysis as usual. And we'll be talking soon in the future.
Okay, Nevin, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.